Jason, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
3 Pennsylvania lawmakers are moving to impeach Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner, saying unchecked violent crime in the city has reached a breaking point due to Krasner's refusal to enforce the law. What's your take on the move?
Well, I think it's a great move. It's certainly a move in the right direction. We've seen the social justice prosecutors across the country fail to observe their oath of office to prosecute criminals and get, hardcore violent criminals off the street. The problem is particularly acute in Philadelphia, which has seen a 78% increase in homicides under Mr. Krasner's watch.
Yes, your organization has documented this correlation between so-called soft-on-crime DAs and rising crime rates. Could you tell us a little more about crime in Philadelphia since Krasner took office?
Well, as I said, homicides have increased 78% under his watch, and they increased in Philadelphia even before the riots that we saw more recently in 2020, when many other cities have had increases in homicides. So this is something that really was concurrent with Mr. Krasner taking over. So it's pretty easy to see what the cause of it is. He's lost or dropped significantly higher rates of felony cases, felony drug and handgun cases than his predecessor. He has a decarceration philosophy where he doesn't want to see people go to jail. He essentially wants to see drugs legalized and violent felons remain on the streets, even pending their trials.
And you mentioned that this is part of a trend, or it seems to be, and the effort to impeach Krasner comes actually just 1 week after San Francisco voters successfully recalled former DA Chesa Boudin, whose lack of prosecution has also been blamed for the city's rampant rise in violent crime. And there's also an effort underway to recall Los Angeles DA George Gascon. What do you make of this trend?
Well, certainly it's a trend in the right direction. We've been able to identify, my organization, Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, in our study of it, have been able to identify 75 what we call social justice prosecutors around the country. You named a few of them. They're some of the most notorious, but there are many others. Kim Fox in Chicago, Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, and I could go on. And really the underlying, there's a few underlying commonalities among them. They come from civil rights backgrounds, criminal defense, suing the police department. Mr. Krasner sued in his private practice, sued the Philadelphia Police Department about 75 times. They don't come at this to hold criminals accountable. They come at this to radically change the criminal justice system. And so far, the results are not good.
And what's driving it? What's behind this? What's the ultimate goal here?
I don't know their ultimate goal, other than it seems to be to create chaos and to upend an orderly society. We're seeing homicides, all measures of violent crime, but homicides in particular, increase in every city across America where we have a social justice prosecutor. What the ends are, I don't know, but I think that some of the evidence we're seeing, whether it's Chesa Boudin in San Francisco or now Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, the effort to unseat the Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, is people are tired of it, and they're starting to make the connection between district attorneys and rapidly rising rates of violent crime in cities, and they're not going to tolerate it. So whether it's at the ballot box or through impeachment, through recalls, we really need to see this change, because all that underlies this is George Soros and his billions of dollars that we recently documented the amount of money being injected into these prosecutors' race. Mr. Gascon, 90% of his fundraising, 90% of his fundraising when he first took office was from George Soros and his interests. And that's what's fueling this. What the ultimate goal is, your guess is as good as mine.
What do you think George Soros's interests are here?
Well, he's got a radical view of criminal justice in the United States, and he wants his vision of the United States, and particularly in urban communities in the United States, to take hold. And he's doing it by identifying political offices that are fairly inexpensive to buy, and he is buying them. As I said, for Mr. Krasner, 90% of his fundraising when he took office came from George Soros. 90%. And that's not unusual in the offices that we studied, that Mr. Soros was able to purchase these offices just by making enormous contributions, and his candidates were elected, and they are putting his vision of criminal justice reform in. United States citizens who have a stake in this need to take action to push back, and they are.
Now, you and your organization work very closely with law enforcement officers. Tell us, what impact do these DAs have on police officers and their jobs?
Well, they have an incredible impact in two different spheres. The first is that, police officers take great risk, and that their entire effort at work is to identify and bring to justice those who commit acts of violence. And when they do that, and the cases just get thrown out, dismissed, or otherwise disposed of, they see these felons out walking the street the very next day that they're arrested. These officers will take that as evidence that really their jobs don't matter, and that going after these violent offenders doesn't make a difference. And so it's demoralizing, it's disempowering, and we're seeing the evidence on the back end of that crime has increased dramatically. And also, many of these prosecutors tend to focus their efforts more on police officers, prosecuting police officers much more aggressively than they do prosecuting street criminals. And so that has a chilling effect on law enforcement. It makes them reticent to do their job. And again, we're seeing the evidence of that in the crime numbers.
Do you think crime is going to be a top issue for voters during the upcoming election?
Absolutely. It already is. I mean, in addition to the economy and inflation, it is a very high concern. Voters are taking notice of the dynamics at play here. Many cities in America, when you go to, they're not nearly as safe as they used to be. There's a certain chaos and a lack of safety that exists. And the reason, there are many reasons for it, but the biggest reason is there's a lack of accountability for those who would commit acts of violence. The district attorneys elected in these cities are the primary cause of that.
Jason Johnson, president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We reached out to Krasner's office for comment, but didn't hear back before airtime. And just in, LA District Attorney George Gascon's recall effort has hit a milestone. The campaign's organizers say they now have enough signatures to qualify for the ballot, 10% of registered voters in the county. Although they say they're still collecting signatures in case some of those already collected are invalidated.